to answer some questions. It's really exciting. I think you picked a good panel. You will not be sorry you're here. They're really exciting projects, every one of them. And I think, Brooke, if when you begin, if you'll say your name and your school so we can locate you in the world. Okay. You're ready. Go, Brooke.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brook Pessin-Whedbee. I teach transitional kindergarten at Rosa Parks Elementary School. Rosa Parks, this is the first year we've had transitional kindergarten at Rosa Parks in Berkeley, although it's the third or fourth year that the program has existed in the district. So in my class, I have a pretty diverse class of 23 students. There are about 40% of my class would be considered socioeconomically disadvantaged. I have about 20% students with special needs, about 35% African American students, 30% white students. So it's a pretty diverse group. What is not diverse about them is that they all have birthdays in October and November. So they're all 4 when they started with me in September. They're all 5 now, but they, while it's a new grade level that is housed in elementary school, it's very much like, it's sort of a bridge between preschool and elementary school. So that's sort of the context for where I am. Transitional kindergarten is a new grade level. It's the first new grade level since 1873. And it was created in 2010 by the Kindergarten Readiness Act, which kind of changed the entrance age for kids going into kindergarten so that kids had to be fully 5 by September 1st. So transitional kindergarten was created with that act to be a place for all the fall birthday kids who were no longer eligible for kindergarten. So it's new. And with that, we transitional kindergarten teachers are sort of creating the curriculum and writing the standards and aligning with the preschool learning foundations and also with Common Core and trying to find sort of a middle ground there. We're developing the assessments and the report cards and basically developing these new classroom environments that have never existed before, which is very exciting, but it's also has been very challenging. And what I have seen, what I have loved about transitional kindergarten is that every year I see kids enter my classroom. I have been a kindergarten teacher for many years before, and this year and in previous years I see kids who are coming in to my classes speaking in paragraphs, and then I have kids who are just trying to complete a sentence. I have kids who can retell an entire story that they have read over and over and know by heart. And then I have kids who are just trying to sequence 3 events and put them in order. I have kids who are using really high-level vocabulary and are very specific and clear in the way they're talking. And then I have kids who are just trying to, be understood when they speak. So there's a huge discrepancy, a huge gap before they've even set foot in my classroom. And I've noticed that year after year. And in transitional kindergarten, I feel like we finally have this opportunity to kind of look at that and address it and say, hey, what kind of curriculum can we have? What kind of classroom environment can we have that is going to sort of move towards leveling that playing field, or at least bringing it more into balance so that all of our kids are going on to kindergarten really ready for what is now a much more rigorous program with the Common Core standards and more of a focus on academic work. So, let's see. There's a lot of research out there already that says, that talks about how oral language skills in early childhood really vary considerably for kids from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So, for example, kids from wealthier families hear 30 million more words by age 3 than kids from lower income households. The newest research out of Stanford just published this year has shown that kids can identify pictures of familiar words, so like a dog or a bull or a cat by 18 months, much more easily, much faster if they're from wealthier homes than the lower income families, than the lower income kids. And they acquire 30% more new vocabulary by the age of 2. So there's a lot out there already that's saying oral language skills are, there's a big gap in oral language skills for kids from different types of households, and that is a strong predictor of their later success in reading and writing. So kids with higher vocabularies, with higher level vocabulary at younger ages are going to be better writers and better readers later on. So the research says. And what I'm trying to look at in my classroom is, there are administrators and teachers who feel like, well, the early intervention that we need is, longer school days or more skills building. They need to learn their alphabet earlier. They need to be reading at, higher levels earlier on. And a lot of that, there's value to a lot of those things. But the work that I did in my classroom this year was really trying to look at, I wanted to see how I could recreate the early literacy experiences that some of my kids have had since birth. How I could recreate that for the kids who haven't had that. So how can I make my classroom be more like those children's homes? And what needs to happen to sort of give them those rich early literacy experiences. And by that I mean, there are kids who have been listening to stories since they were born. They've been reading good books, they've been having conversations with adults, they've been answering questions and asking questions, they've been telling their own stories, they've had lots of those opportunities. And so I wanted to see how can I make my classroom be, incorporate all of those oral language skills and early literacy skills. So there was a curriculum that I had created a few years ago called Story Plays, and I had created that when I was teaching kindergarten, because I felt like my kids were coming with all these rich stories, and during writing time, we were really just trying to write, one simple sentence. I played ball, and it's hard enough to even just listen to the word ball and hear that it has a b at the beginning, and then match that b sound with a b, and then write the letter B. I mean, that's a lot of steps for the kids. So by the end of their writing period, if they had even been able to write I played ball, it wasn't even close to the story that they had in their mind at the time about, when they went and played soccer and their brother fell down. And so I created Story Plays to kind of be a venue for their stories. And what I did was I had 2 kids work together to make up stories, any story they wanted together, and they would sit and they would talk about it together and plan out what was going to happen, and then they would go to their tables and they would draw a picture of what was happening. And, oh my, 5 minutes. I'll talk fast. And they would draw their story, and then we would come together as a whole group, and the teacher or an adult in the room would have taken the dictation for their story, and we would act it out, and they would watch their stories sort of come to life in the classroom. So I took that curriculum and I brought it to my transitional kindergarten class, and I had to modify it completely because even just thinking of a story together was really hard for my students. What I wanted to see was how can this process sort of give kids a developmental approach to building early literacy skills, oral language skills, and collaborative learning experiences. And I focused on 3 students in my class, but really primarily one student, Marion, who was coming in with much lower level literacy skills, and I paired her. I had her work in partnerships with a few other kids who had lots of experience listening to stories and telling stories, and they came up with some stories over the course of the year. And I looked closely at what they were doing. I had 3 learning goals for my whole class, and I looked closely at what they were doing. So I collected data while they were drawing their pictures, while they were the stories that they told. I sort of went through and looked at the elements in their stories, and then I took videos of their process as they were collaborating to write the stories. And I pulled out some indicators of success for each of those learning goals. So for the story writing skills, for the storytelling skills, I wanted to see that their stories had a very clear beginning. They had a middle, they had an end, they had elements of character, setting, problem, solution. I wanted to see, that was for storytelling skills. My second learning goal was their oral language skills, and there were many oral language skills I was looking at, but for the purpose of this project, I pulled out I wanted to see them using transition phrases, so every day there was something something, and until one day something something happened, or first this happened and then this happened. So transition words were another learning goal that I had sort of in the oral language category. And then I also wanted to see them using higher level vocabulary and then collaborating together, so taking turns, telling the story, working together on the same piece of paper, talking about the same story instead of having two separate stories. There was a whole lot of collaboration indicators that I had also. So I looked at, going back to Marion, I looked at her stories from the beginning of the year. And in the beginning what was happening was she had a good sense of character and setting from the start. So for example, the first story she wrote in October, her partner said there was a pig in a barn and the pig was walking on a path. And then she added in, the little guy was like, moo, and it was not a cow, it was a pig, and he ran to a person named Joe. So she's got a sense of the characters. Her partner said, first he turned backwards and the pig was jumping on him, and then he turned around and said, how did you get to here? You're supposed to be at the barn. The pig jumped in a pile of mud. And then she added on, and he jumped in the farm. So she has a sense of the setting and the characters, but her language didn't always quite make sense. What did she mean by he jumped in the farm? She had an idea, but she wasn't able to convey it in precise language that made a lot of sense. So they went through this process sort of through the year, and then by the spring what I was seeing was that she was still working on her oral language skills, and her vocabulary were still she was still developing in that sense, but she was taking a lot more of the lead in her story writing. So rather than always following her partner's lead, she actually towards the spring began to initiate the stories. And I think part of that, the way I understood that, was that she was comfortable now. She had heard her partner telling pieces of the story, and then she would add on. But by the spring, as they had talked about the story, she was comfortable when I came over and said, are you ready to tell me your story? She actually was ready to tell me her story, and she was the one taking the lead and saying, here, there are two cakes here, and this is a swimming pool where you get in, and Ellen and my friends are always playing with us. And this was a story that they ended up writing about a birthday party that happened at a swimming pool. And so there were some really interesting developments in her own storytelling skills and her collaboration skills. And I also felt like, for me, what I figured out by the end of, we're almost at the end of the year, what I have figured out is, I haven't recreated 5 years of this child's life. I haven't completely changed, she's not going into kindergarten in the same place that some of my other students are. But I have, by looking closely at her stories through the year and her partnerships, I have figured out what my classroom needs to look like in order to provide those experiences, those early literacy experiences. So, I created a story center that I had never had before that was going to help scaffold with felt pieces. How do you tell a story, an emergent story like a story? I did storytelling circles with the whole group, which I had never done before, but that scaffolded the storytelling skills for them. I modified the story play curriculum. If anyone's interested, I can talk about how I changed bits of the curriculum to be more applicable to transitional kindergarten. And I developed an assessment framework. So there was a lot of growth that I had also, and I feel like now, as a transitional kindergarten teacher, I actually know what I need to do in my classroom to provide those early literacy experiences for my kids. And I'm not changing kids completely, but I'm getting closer to what they need to be ready when they go on to kindergarten. And I think, if I teach kindergarten again, I will never teach kindergarten the same. I'll bring so much of what I've learned from GK into the kindergarten classroom as well, and really have a more balanced approach between the academic and the developmental. So I am happy to answer. I can talk about this forever. I'm happy to answer lots of questions.
Now we have a little bit of time for questions. People have questions for Brooke? Blair, go ahead.
I want the partnership that you made, the story partnership, they stayed the same throughout the year?
No, they did not stay the same throughout the year, but they stayed the same for a good long time. And that was actually part of my research last year, was looking at collaboration and partnering, and I had purposely kept kids together for longer periods of time than I had typically done, because I felt like they needed time to get used to each other as partners to develop what ways to work together. And then mid-year, we switched and had a partnership.
Was your class TK or MK or just TK? Only TK. And how many kids did you have?
2.
And that's a lot. And were your indicators of success the same overall, or were they different? You know, and did you have like a group of students who you thought, well, these would be their indicators of success because maybe they were higher, you know, or kids who were the lowest kids in your class? Were they grouped together? Was it individual?
No, I actually had the same indicators for the whole class, and I went through this kind of complicated process in developing the indicators where I didn't know what I was looking for at first. I had the learning goals in mind, but I didn't know how I was going to know if my kids were meeting those goals. So what I did was, in the first batch of story plays that came out in the fall, I really read through them and watched these videos for hours, looking at, what are they doing? And I used the kids actually to inform. Watching what the students were doing helped me to make the indicators, because I could see, well, these kids here who I would consider have strong storytelling skills are, they're looking at the anchor charts, they're using the storybook language, so I pulled that out as an indicator of success. Some kids are already doing it, and that's what I want everyone to be doing. So I had the same indicators for all of my students, but they really came out of what some of my students were already doing. Does that answer your question?
One more, and then we have to.
I missed at some of them exactly how where is this right for the kids that take writing their own stories?
Sorry, I skipped over that part. So I got my 5-minute part at that very moment.
Oh, okay, all right.
The grown-ups write the stories. Yeah. So the kids think of them, they draw them, they talk about it, and then the teacher or the grown-up comes in and says, "Are you ready to tell me your story?" And then writes down exactly what they say word for word.
We're going to unfortunately have to move to the next person. Just for people who are new or thinking about this notion of indicators is when the teachers have a learning goal that they're trying to read, and I think Brooke explained it really well. And then you say, well, if the teachers, if your kids are accomplishing that goal, what will it look like? What will be an indicator that they've accomplished it? And that's a really interesting and important process in this. A lot of times one of the teachers was trying to do argumentative essays. So if your students wrote an argumentative essay, what would it look like? What would it have? And I think that's a really interesting and important part of this no-teaching scholarship process. And you illustrated it well.
I have a logistical question. The handouts that we brought, are those supposed to be made available?
Yeah, why don't we pass them around? While those are coming around, so that you have them, is there a gentleman in this room? A gentleman?
Joan?
Are you doing this, supposed to be doing the timing?
Oh, no, I am. I'm the next timer.
Okay.
Oh, I think
Yeah, I can do it from here. I didn't want to take away this.
I don't need the job.
I'll do it right here. Okay, so our next speaker is Blair. Blair, you introduce yourself?
I would love to introduce myself. My name's Blair Mosner. I teach 9th grade cultural geography at Community High School. And actually, I'm not convinced that the breakdown of English language learners and so on is that important to this particular study. So suffice to say, there are 14 that come to high school newly. Wow. No, it's cool. I'm just trying to make it feel open. Suffice to say that they're 9th graders, so that they are new to high school, new to some of the routines and procedures that we have at UNI, which tends to be a pretty strict school in terms of behavioral expectations. In any case, as I was thinking about the beginning of the year, what do I want my classroom to look like? I was fixated on this one question, and I could see students asking it with their backpacks on and all of their stuff still in their backpacks, sitting in their chair, which is, what are we going to do today? And this question truly drove me crazy because I felt like it reflected really badly on me, like how bad are my classroom routines that you don't know what to do, that you still have your backpack on. I don't understand. And also, like, what's with you? Like, what do you think is going to happen? We've been studying East Asian maps for 3 days. We're not suddenly going to switch and be a biology class. It's not going to happen. And so I really wanted to get rid of that question. Of course, it wasn't the question that was the problem. It was that I wanted my students to be thinking more carefully about what we had been doing, what we were likely to do the next day. And then I put that into a nice academic frame, which is I wanted students to be mobilizing prior course content as they went through their learning with me. And so I asked myself what kind of routines and procedures I could put in place to make that possible, and I came up with 3. I'm assuming that the 5 people here are the ones with the data. But in any case, those 4 routines were a TMTO, a 2-minute think over, which actually takes 10 minutes. It's a yellow sticky. Students write 3 takeaways, a question, and a prediction. We had the Did You Know, which was at the end of the week, where students would write what they discovered that week, and they had to take it home and have it signed after a conversation with family members. We had agenda annotations, which were to take place at the end of the unit. They would go back to their agendas and say, okay, what was the most important piece from this day, and then this day, and then this day. And finally, the concept card, which I wanted to be this beautiful thing that would engage visual and kinesthetic learners and have all this synthesis and that kind of thing. And so this research is the story of me trying those routines out and seeing how well they work. So if you have it in front of you, you can look at it, and we'll start with concept cards, which you actually don't have in front of you because they totally didn't work. I wanted these beautiful things with images and with students making connections and synthesizing a whole unit, and I got a huge mess and shallow understanding. And so I said, okay, well, I'll try it again. I tried it again. Well, tried to try it again, and I ran out of time, so I said, no, let's try it again. And then I pushed really, really hard to it in unit 3, and again, I pushed something out of the way and it was a huge mess and no depth of understanding. So I said, forget it, and I haven't done it since. But more successfully, the TMTO, the 2-minute think over. What I was hoping to find with it was that depth of thinking. I was hoping the questions and predictions would help me really understand what students were doing. I was hoping it would take them deeper, and I found that the takeaways were pretty much working. They were giving me the big ideas from the lesson. The predictions were mostly sensible, if inaccurate. We weren't actually going to do the stuff that they thought we were going to do. And the questions gave me a lot of information about how students were thinking about the topic. But I also noticed that they took a lot of time, and I didn't have anything to do with them. As I considered that routine, I didn't get far enough to say, what do I do with the TMTO once a student hands it in to me? And so that's okay. I tried it again. But I wasn't seeing students in round 2 connecting to prior course content. They were really good at saying, this is what we did today, this is my question about it, what I think we'll do tomorrow, but they weren't pulling it back to prior course content. And so what I did at the end of that round 2 is I took the takeaways and I scrapped the questions and the predictions. For those of you who want to see it, you can see it here from October and December. The 9th grade. The daily geography, the Did You Know? Is a weekly assignment where students write in the top and they have to have the bottom sign. My anticipation or my hope with that was that they would be having these deep thoughts, sharing them with people, making connections, really looking through the whole week's learning to find the most important piece of information. And what I found in round 1, and the sample here is from a student who said, this week in cultural geography, I discovered that Ms. Mosner likes Doctor Who. Which is, she's 14, and so this is wow, my teacher's a person, stuck with her or whatever, but that's not what I was hoping for. And so I did some direct instruction of what makes a good Did You Know? And they got a little bit better, but they still tended to be pretty shallow. So this week in cultural geography is round 2. I discovered that people consume different amounts of food each week. We had studied a Hungry Planet, so around the world what people are eating. And that's much more on topic than the Doctor Who example, but it's still pretty pretty weak. And so after round 2, I'm looking at this happening and I'm thinking, maybe this is not such a good data point. Maybe this is much better for communicating with students, for checking to see that they're completing their work. It's a weekly homework assignment, and so a student would come to me and say, how can I get my grade up? And I would look and I'd say, well, we have had 13 of these and you've done 2. And that was helpful, but maybe it's not going to be a data point for prior course content. So, okay, we're moving on, and then we get to the agenda annotations. The agenda annotations started, students write down the agenda when they come into the room. As I write it down, that's the first thing that they do. I love it because there's nobody who says, what do I do? Everybody knows you take out your binder, you write the agenda down, that's how it goes. And then I had them going back, unit 1, 2, and 3, where they were going back at the end of the unit trying to remember it. And of course, they couldn't remember what happened that day. So I had agenda annotations that were like, I learned to understand thematic maps. And that's not what we learned that day, it's just what the headline and the agenda was. And stuff like, we practiced thematic maps if the headline was thematic maps practice. So that wasn't working, and so what I decided to do was to take the takeaway from the 2-minute thinkover and swap that piece in for the agenda annotation. That became the takeaways that students are doing every day. Agenda at the beginning, lesson in the middle, takeaway at the end. I also swapped out my closing routine for that, so I'm checking each student. I can give them more guidance. It also makes a nice setup for dismissing students because it goes, okay, back up, okay, back up. This needs to be more detailed. And it's really a nice sort of routine thing. And so we're in, let's say, January right now, and I'm looking back at my routines and I'm saying, how are they going? Students are doing basically what I want in all 3, because I scrapped that 4th one, but in none of them am I really able to see prior course content. So I did some tweaks, and then I looked in some new places for information about whether students were connecting to prior course content. The new things I did were threefold. One was a piece of academic writing in Unit 5, where they were arguing for or against affirmative action, and what I was expecting was that stronger students would be showing more prior course content, but it was actually the opposite. The better the essay, the less prior course content was coming in, because they were synthesizing it and discussing the issues on the table. Worse papers pulled from prior units a lot more, because they were like, I don't really understand this thing, let me take this thing from Unit 4 that I understand, this Unit 2 thing I understand, and plop it in. That was pretty fascinating to me. The small group conversations were like the most gratifying lesson that I did all year. It was in Unit 5. The Unit 5 question is really interesting. It's what is race? And I set students up in these small groups, and I gave them 13 questions. And they got in their groups, chose 2 of the questions, went out of their groups and wrote their ideas, and then shared them and came up with points of unity. But the important thing there is that in those conversations was the first time I really saw students linking to prior course content without being like clumsy about it. I heard students actually say the words, no, you can't, because culture is a way of life shared by a group of people, like from Unit 1. I heard those words. I was like, and this is a particularly amazing group of boys. But it was just amazing how with those guided questions and with that open space to do that conversation, they were trying to make meaning by leaning on the information that they had prior. That was awesome. Very successful. And through that, I realized you can't always find links. You can't find in those little routines those amazing connections. Those happen in those sort of broader situations. I also started doing guided takeaways where I would tell students, give me your takeaway, and then I would list all the units we've done and tell me which one it connects to. And if you are looking at the data, you can see that on one day, I had students connect with Unit 2, Unit 4, Unit 3, Unit 5, and Unit 1. So they were making these connections all over the place when I was pushing them to do so. The big takeaways going forward have to do with, one, timing, like when is the right time in my course overall to be asking students to link to prior knowledge. Not even prior knowledge. I'm not talking about like what you know from your life. I'm talking about what we studied in Unit 1. It's not September 5th. Like that's not the day that they're going to look back on their prior course content and be like, oh, it's just like we learned on Tuesday. They can do that a little bit, but it's not meaningful. That comes later. That comes like after Unit 3 or 4. So that was a big takeaway for me. The other major takeaways for me also have to do with the benefits of the routines, but also how clunky those routines ended up being. Because I didn't think at the beginning of the year about how those routines would open up as the year progressed, I kind of just had to like wing it. When I was like, oh no, these routines are too constricting, I need to open them up. And it worked okay. They were trained up on the yellow sticky. They knew what to do when I put a yellow sticky in front of them. So when I pushed them to think more with it, they were able to do it. Same thing for the did you know. But it definitely makes me think that if I had been in August thinking more clearly about what I want, how I want my students to grow, I would also be thinking about how I want those routines to shift and open up as time goes on. And I think that's probably the main takeaway, and it's really interesting too, because as we start doing, and I've got two of my colleagues here, so as we start doing the vertical alignment between 9th and 12th, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is, what does that opening up look like? A 9th grader in September should not be the same as a 9th grader in June, same thing with a 10th or 11th grader. So figuring out how these structures and routines that we're trying to adopt can open for students, as opposed to just being like, this is how we do it, and now you're a 12th grader and you want like sentence starters for your topic sentence. Obviously that's not functional. And it stinks because I just ended on a sour note about 12th graders wanting sentence starters. Ultimately, this was a really great look into how the routines that I had come up with ultimately helped me get what I wanted, but I had to wait for it. Not just because I had to wait to see, but because they weren't ready for it until about halfway through the year.
Okay, questions? Especially from the people who are in college.
I, as a literature teacher, I'm really intrigued by the idea of like the constant connection to those things. I think ideally, like my students in the literature classroom would be able to be connecting all the novels and plays and looking at themes and that kind of thing. I'm wondering, just I think you said that the small group discussion was where that really came out the most. Can you describe a little bit? I know you said you had 13 questions, but what were some of the structures that you feel like enabled them to be able to say, oh, but it's like you learned what you want?
They were open-ended, so this is Unit 5, which is what is race, and so the questions were really open-ended, like, can someone be more than one race? Are you born with your race? Can you change your race? How do you know if someone is the same race as you? So they were really open-ended, high-interest questions. The structure that I liked the best was where I gave students their groups, and I had them go into their groups, choose 2 or 3 of the questions, leave their groups and write down what they thought on these little half sheets, these half cards, and then I had them go back into their groups and come up with points of unity, things that they could all agree on, which was kind of neat because it had a product, and it required everyone to be on the same page. And now I'm sure there are some students who are just like, yeah, I agree, whatever. But it was super productive conversations, and that's across all 4 periods of 9th grade. They really seemed to get into that. I don't know what about it exactly made them think, oh, like Unit 1, except that the questions, the right answer was, that's like what I wanted them to do. So the questions were kind of leading, which was helpful. Does that answer your question?
So in your initial takeaways that were about this is what I learned this week, okay?
Are you talking about the Did You Know, the weekly one?
Yeah.
This week I discovered?
Yeah. Did you ever ask them why does it matter?
Sure. So later on, as I was sort of feeling discouraged about the Did You Knows and feeling like I'm not getting what I want, this is not working. Eventually, it was actually after winter break, I was able to start shifting them around a little. So my later ones, instead of saying this week I discovered blank and that being it, is something like this week in cultural geography I discovered blank. This is important to know and understand because. Or for example, Unit 7 is all about blank. So far we have learned blank. I predict next week we will blank. So I did start giving them a little more guidance for that. Ideally, I guess if I were to do it again, I would give them more guidance early on and less guidance later as they got used to it, but I wasn't smart enough to do that. So next time. Yeah, so yeah, actually as we went on in round 3, I was giving them a lot more guidance. And it's through that guidance that they were able to make it. It was amazing when I said, how does this connect to something to a unit that we learned before? And I did it by unit. It wasn't just something. It was like, which unit does it connect to? They were really able to do that. And kids think all different. It was just so cool. We're studying perspectives on the U.S.-Mexico border, and they're like, it connects to Unit 1 because it's about like, there's so much racism. We studied racism in Unit 1. It's about Unit 2 because it's about how there's an imaginary line on a map and it really matters. It's about Unit 3 because we study California public health and there are people who are being hurt as they're trying to cross the border. That's a public health issue. So many different kinds of connections when I ask them to go unit by unit.
It's so exciting to hear you talk about this because you think that you've created a curriculum that, you know, it makes sense and connects one idea to the other. And you're trying to help kids recognize it. They're not used to it. I mean, there's all kinds of fragmented things going on in schools. So you're teaching them the skill of saying, oh, this is really about something. We are actually learning things that connect to one another.
Right, this is a course.
This is a course.
Right, it's a course of learning and a course of knowledge that you're going through. It's not like today's nugget of knowledge, tomorrow's nugget of knowledge. I guess I'll pass the test.
Yeah, so it's really, you're helping them learn how to learn from a well-constructed curriculum.
I hope.
Yeah.
One of the takeaways for me, and you'll like this actually, is that my pedagogical content knowledge has to include where those connections come up.
Yeah.
But it's not enough for me to know how to explain isms versus personal issues.
Right.
I have to be able to say, okay, this comes up again in Unit 3 and again in Unit 4, and
I'm looking at those connections, those lines of connection, those through lines.
yeah.
They connect this to, your students are lucky, and I have the same exact challenge in my teaching of graduate students.
Really?
Thinking about, okay, what does this have to do with what we've already done? Come on. You know, so it's fabulous that they're learning it in 9th grade.
Hopefully they are learning.
I like that you said that this particular group of boys is an exceptional group of boys. Like, I've noticed the last couple of years, it just could be in my classrooms, but I've noticed the last couple of years that boys are getting it a lot more. I see that a lot. Like, so I really appreciated that you said that because I have no colleagues that will agree with me, but I really see boys kind of coming to an understanding about things a little bit earlier. I don't know if that's the reason that I put that in there or if it's just your group, but I've noticed, I teach elementary school, and I've noticed that, and so I just really like that. It really kind of brought it back to me, like that's really cool that they understood that.
I think so that group of boys were that, no, it's like this thing,
Right.
because definition from Unit 1,
Right.
What's going on with those boys is it was 4 boys, one of whom is like a firecracker, and I'll tell you who all these people are later. One of whom is like very quiet, but very serious about his work. Another of which loves to argue, and the other one who's like fastidious about keeping track of all his stuff. So it was just this like perfect storm of like really. It was the group, and I put them together on purpose. I couldn't believe that what came out of it was no, because culture is a way of life shared by a group of people, like from Unit 1. That was just like the perfect thing. And there were excellent conversations from groups, mixed gender and single gender groups of boys and girls. And actually the data that you have in front of you from the small group conversation, this is from my vocal student who's female. And she made the connection in Unit 5 about race, which I didn't talk about culture at all. I didn't say those words in my questions. She actually said race is made through cultural history, and then had that discussion. I had good conversations across the genders, but those 4 boys in particular were really well-rounded.
I hope that you put them through.
Okay, we must move on to our next presenter. Courtney, you are up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
So here's some handouts. And I have extras for you guys too. So if you want them, if you can. Okay. I saw the 5-minute sign. I was like, sorry. Okay, so I'm Courtney Connolly. I teach at Montera Middle School. I teach 7th grade history. Just for some context for those of you who might not be as familiar with Montera, it's Oakland's largest middle school. We have over 950 students, 6 to 8. I have 160 students. And Montera is actually a really awesome school for a lot of reasons. One of them is the demographics of our school are really diverse, socioeconomically and also as far as race. So about 40% of our population is African American or Black. About 28% is white. About 19% Latino, and then about 10% Pacific Islander. In my area of focus, I was looking at students and their ability to explain their position on a historical topic using critical thinking skills, and especially analysis. So through this process, what I'm expecting students to be able to do is actually really very challenging for an adult, let alone a 7th grader. I'm looking for them to be able to create a claim, support that claim with reasons, look at a whole plethora of evidence, choose evidence that's going to support their reasons and will support their claim, and then, but what I'm really looking at in this study is how are they able to analyze that evidence in order to support their claim, and the critical thinking skills that are involved in that. One of the things I ask my students to do in an activity I have them do is called So What. I just kind of made it up, but basically at the core of it, they have a partner and their partner is constantly pressing them with the only question is so what? So what? And they have to keep answering it. So that brings me to the so what of my my research, which is like why does this really matter to me? And the reason that I'm focusing on this is because I just too often see that our students are they just like want to have an answer to something, or they want to have a claim and get their evidence and their reasons and then just sort of be done with it. They're really disconnected. This isn't just like a hunch that I just kind of like think this from like this old like teacher perspective, but like I actually have asked my students about this. So I asked many of my students, but my focal students' response when I said, why do you think we spend so much time on partner talk? Like, why do you think we spend so much time like looking at these things, talking about your opinions in class? And he was like, so we're prepared when you call on us. Like that was his answer, like, so we're prepared. And for me, I was like, oh boy, okay, so this is exactly why I'm doing this work, because like that's great that you're prepared, but like I want you to be critical, I want you to be involved, I want you to like take a position. And so with that, the focal students who I chose two. One was a Latino male, and then the other was African American female. They both are in a strategies class, ELA strategies class, but I focused most of my work on the Latino male because he is also an EL student. So I wanted to see what are my instructional strategies doing for him or not doing for him as far as the analysis. And so initially my learning goals took the form of like a little bit more kind of rote knowledge, which I realized later on through talking with my colleagues was not really what I wanted. And so they shifted, and my learning goal became for students to be able to use textual evidence and individual reasoning to develop critical analysis of historical texts, which I think is on the handout I gave you. And this was a really significant change for me because it more closely represented what I was really trying to look at, which was the critical thinking skills of my students. And but more importantly, I think that that's important because I want them to see history as something that's fluid, that's not static, that their interpretation matters. It actually makes the history. Like history is not just one interpretation. So when they sit there and they have a claim and they're using reasons and evidence and they're just kind of like done with it, or they just like give me an answer and you ask so what and they're like, Moop. Like I want them to see that their opinions matter because it makes the history. It's not just from one perspective. So as far as the data, you have some in front of you. It's a lot of writing, so I apologize for that, but it's because they're mostly transcripts. And in the beginning, I was looking more at written data, which is the first one that you're seeing. So with a written analysis, what you're seeing is just like I wrote out something that was part of on a graphic organizer. And so I was looking for them to connect their reasons and their evidence. I have So their reasons and their evidence, but then I thought about it and I was like, you know what, like I want them, they need to be able to connect their reasons, their evidence, but I really more so want them to be able to, again, like think about this deeply and critically analyze. And so I found out that I actually knew very little about what I meant by that, though, was the problem. Like, what do I mean by, like, critically analyzing this text? Like I can't even explain it. How am I expecting them to do it? Like, oh my God. So, and then I also found out that the indicators that I was looking at initially were actually not what I really wanted. So those indicators changed once I started to look at some more data. I shifted my research from looking at the written data to more of the like verbal spoken. I looked at debate. We did a lot of structured debates. We did a lot of partner talk time, and so after analyzing that data, I came up with some new indicators. And this was a big shift in my teaching from focusing on mostly writing to creating structures in the classroom that were going to be more around like partner talk time and debates. I wanted to hear what they were saying around these spaces I was providing for critical thinking and analysis of text. And so one of the first things that I did was do the so what activity that I talked about earlier. I recorded conversations around the so what activity, and looking at those recorded conversations, I changed one of my indicators, which I think is somewhere in there. So, but what I was seeing in the so what, well, they were answering the question so what as many times as they could until they couldn't answer that question anymore. I changed my indicator to that first indicator that you're seeing in April 2013. Then I also looked at counter arguments. What I noticed in recording debates, so I actually video recorded some of my debates, is that my focal student in the first debate did not respond to any counter argument. He wasn't able to say anything. He relied on his partners on his team to do it for him. So I switched and I made everybody have to respond to a counter argument as part of their rubric. And so then he was able to make progress and attempted to respond to the counter argument. It wasn't like exactly what I was looking for, but there was definitely a positive shift there. So then you see my indicator, the second indicator that's around counter argument, that's how that came about. And then this piece around like how am I connecting students to really critically think? I was like, okay, so like I wanted them to connect to these bigger ideas in history, but like how am I going to do that? So I changed the so what activity to connect to some of the themes that we talk about in class. I have this acronym pieces. One of the elements is economics, power, innovation. There's just a couple things. And so and that's where the third indicator came about. So I wanted to see specifically were students able to connect their analysis to those bigger themes. And so then I went back and I looked at data again with these new indicators. And I saw, like at the beginning, that my focal student could use his reasons and evidence to support a claim. I saw that he was attempting to respond to a counter argument. But then my biggest aha moment was around this so what activity, because he actually, that so what activity that I recorded for him, after being asked so what, it's the last piece of the data, the one that says partner conversation transcript on page 2. Thank you, Brooke. So he got further and further away actually from the claim that he was trying to support. I think what he was doing is he started to bring in maybe things that he knew from his personal life, but not content that was helping to further his analysis, which is not what I wanted at all. So that was like, it was a great aha moment, but it was also like a huge like ego bubble bursting moment for me as a teacher, because if I wasn't getting what I was expecting I was going to get out of this. And a reason that also, just as apart from my own personal interest in this, with the shift to the Common Core, which I'm sure almost all of you in here are familiar with, we're expected to have our students engage in these academic discussions. We're expected to have them, these academic discussions will lead to further analysis, which students are also going to be expected to do, this higher level critical thinking analysis. And so what I'm seeing is in providing more time for some of these spaces of academic discussion. And with this particular activity, the SOA, it's actually because my student, this particular focal student, who represents, I think, a good portion of many of my students, I don't think he had a firm enough grip on the content knowledge. And so then, for me, that's a really good reminder as a teacher about how important the direct instruction is, how important the modeling is, that like in this shift to the Common Core, we can't forget about the importance of that. With also having to juggle and figure out this new academic discussion piece. After all of this, I'm like rethinking how I'm going to be teaching for next year. And it seems like such a duh thing that like direct instruction and modeling of critical analysis that like, of course, duh, you have to do that first, but like with the shift, like there's really been a lot of like pressure for us to engage in this new way with students, and so it's kind of actually liberating to say, well, look, I have this data. Like we also have to remember the part about the content and the direct instruction. And I'm also wondering around the writing piece, like if these scaffolds around writing, doing those scaffolds first might help in the actual academic discussion, whether having more teacher-centered, not teacher-centered, I shouldn't say that, but like full class discussions where I'm interrupting, like, I hate to say incorrect, but like erroneous sort of thinking around analysis might be something that is more helpful for students like my focal student. So just like the tension that we're all feeling, I think has kind of come out in this for me between like the shift to Common Core and these things that seem really great in theory and on paper, but then the bottom line is that we're also instructing on content, so how do we marry those two for our students to be successful?
Very nice. Questions? And Blair?
Yeah, I do have one, and I've had the great fortune to be able to go on this with you as we've been in the same small groups multiple times, and I'm wondering if you think back to like that very original thought that you were having about like almost like play acting as actors in history, if that seems like relevant anymore at all, or if that's just like your way in. But
It's so complicated because like I am trying to get them to be critical in their analysis, but at the same time, I want them to be able to use these sources and analyze the sources and understand the content. And so it's like they have so many students who just struggle just with accessing the content piece. And I think I know you were talking about like going into like as if you're in the position of someone. Yeah, I know. I don't think it's irrelevant. I think though that what this is highlighting for me is like how do I ensure that my students have a mastery of at least the basics in the actual content material before I'm expecting them to make this leap into the analysis. Is kind of what I've uncovered here. That I think that what I did is I maybe like jumped too quick, or asked my students to jump too quick. Like they weren't. Some of them, like my vocal students, for example, they weren't ready. But it would be interesting, like if that would help, if something like that would help them access the content. I don't know.
yeah, I keep thinking about like, you know, this 12-year-old, like, was it 13?
13 now, but he would have been 12.
Who's like trying to think through like economic issues.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And like, I don't know this
Right,
kid's life
exactly.
or anything, but so often
Yeah.
I think about how we get this first pass with kids and then they become adults and they're like, oh, now I get economics. And
Yeah.
now I get like how social convention really, really matters in this way that like when they're so young.
Because he like gets, like if you look in there, you're talking about
The partner conversation.
the partner conversation. So he chose, that was one of the themes that we talked about as economics. And so he chose for his reason to be connected to economics. I didn't give that to him. He could have chosen power, innovation. Well, innovation was work for this one, but like there's other things he could have chose, but he chose economics. And so he knew that jobs had to do with economics.
Yeah.
But then he went from jobs to losing money, and you don't have any money
but that has nothing to do with the original claim he's trying to support, which is the Crusades were not a necessary war for the Christians to fight. And he's ended up in his so what saying they won't make enough money, if they have no jobs and make no money after the Crusades. And that's like a real thing for like many students and many families, right? So that's why I think he's pulling from what he knows or what he can pull from what seems real to him. But I think, but his understanding of economics jumps. Like, yeah.
I was just going to say, I saw this whole thing, the issue, your conclusion, I love the fact that you backed up and said, they need to know something before they can do this kind of analysis. They have to have some content knowledge first, and we can't distract that. I don't think in direct instruction is the only way to put them together, which I think is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so don't give up the content knowledge, but also you can expand, and I'm sure you do, other ways of getting them.
Right. Right.
So it's such a good question.
Do you think there's a way to teach the Common Core-ish skills that you're trying to do with some, like at the beginning of the year or whatever, with some kind of content that they know that's not necessarily like the course?
Yeah, I was thinking about that yesterday, actually. That, like, especially with this so what activity, which I think is actually, I think it's a useful activity for them. And I was thinking about that, like, the beginning of next year, I want to, like, create some kind of debate that really has very little to do with anything content-wise teaching, which I'm fine with. And get them to just practice what this looks like, or maybe get them to connect to these themes in a way that, yeah, feels more relevant in a way so that they can understand those concepts, make it feel real before we jump into the content.
The only danger I can think of that is just more than you might have to have more of this bringing their personal experience, like your example, into the history when that's not really called for. So
right.
That would be kind of like
right, and I think that, but in order to get them, like my first month of school anyway, like I teach I'm being videotaped. That's not what I meant. I teach very little content because we teach so many routines and this is routine. I want this to become more of a routine. So I think that during that time and then moving away from that. And then there's also always going to be students who connect it back to who just that they connect it back to their life, and it's not a bad thing, but they have to also be able to develop the skill of looking at the sources and evidence.
One of the other scholars, Baja, was doing this in science, and she found out, she said before they can do it in science, they have to be doing something that really draws on their own personal knowledge. And she had them looking at a picture, and they had to make a claim about the picture. I think this is a prince going to save the princess. And so then they say, why do you think that? And they draw on their own experience. Was because I read a book a while ago, and I saw. So they drew on their own experience, and they learned the claims and evidence. And then once they got that routine down, and then she started teaching content science. So it's an interesting. You might talk to her about it because she came up with a very similar conclusion. Yes, one more question, and then we got to go to our next person. We're using it for good. That's okay.
I have one question, Connolly. Did you give them any kind of graphic organizer or visual while they were doing the debating or the so what activity?
Yeah, they had for both. So the debate, they had a graphic organizer that was very similar to what you would use as a graphic organizer for an essay, but for a debate, and it included a spot for counter argument. So they would work individually after a lot of partner talk time on that. So they had that. And then for the so what, same thing, they had, it was like they had to write down their reason and the evidence, exact quote that scored that, and then they had a blank box, so what, and they gave their partner that sheet, and their partner said, so what, and they just talked, their partner wrote what they said.
Okay.
But those were the two things that we used. And I think that I didn't do enough modeling around, especially the so what. I mean, I did a little bit, but not enough.
Joan, we are moving. Everybody can shake a little bit.
Joni DeVries, and I teach at Oakland Community High School, which is a charter high school of about 300 students. I teach and to 11th graders, and also economic government to seniors. And my study, my inquiry was more about the juniors. My students are about 85% long-term English learners, Spanish being their first language, and the rest of the students are not English language learners. I chose to focus on formal writing assignments. This is an area where I feel like I want to grow as a teacher. I want to help my students learn how to write, and in U.S. history, it's part of the Common Core standards, of course, writing argumentative writing and informative writing. And I also wanted students to demonstrate skill in understanding their primary sources through writing and not just kind of verbally, just to be able to talk about it. So in order for my students to learn to write strong arguments, I wanted to see what format would work best for them. So there's a typical 5-paragraph essay, and there are other kinds of things. And that's in general what my exploration is. Is there some other way to do it? So not another essay. Is there something other than an essay that will help them learn how to write well? I started with a focal student who was writing poorly but demonstrated in class discussions that he understood the content. So that was one of my students. And I collected some of his work, then he stopped turning stuff in. So I had to choose a new group of focal students with a wider range of skills. And they all had a fairly high understanding of the content. So I was looking at people with a range of writing skills, but fairly good and consistent. So my learning goal is to help students learn how to develop a strong voice and articulate a claim that has a clear viewpoint. So to me, it's really important that students have a strong voice in their writing, that they're not writing facts, not regurgitating facts, but that they're picking and choosing the facts, articulating a viewpoint that those facts support. And so my routine data source were writing assignments, and we do a lot of writing in my class. Short writing, warm-ups, longer writing, essays, and starting at the end of first semester, we do more in-class essay writing as part of the final exam, and then we do more formal essay writing outside of class. The assignment started with 5-paragraph essays and then changed to more scaffolded paragraphs. When I read their first 5-paragraph essays, it just kept shaking my head. Going, no, they're so bad. They make no sense. There are glimmers of understanding and insight. This is from essay about Declaration of Independence, and I just didn't really know exactly where to start except back at the beginning. We sort of step. Okay, let's just write paragraphs. Let's just try to write a paragraph. Forget about the whole essay. And then I began to realize that